Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. To some of you and peace to the rest of you. This is Black Heart Sign. I'm black in again. Asking you to hit that share button even before you hit like or subscribe because, frankly, the message is more important than the messenger. This message is a response to Cynthia G's response to Oshay Duke Jackson. And at the end of the day, I've just found out something new. I'm going to give Cynthia G, for all of her foolishness, credit where it is due. Apparently, she pointed out that before Loving versus Virginia, there was some cases taken to the Supreme Court in which black men actually petitioned to be allowed to marry white women. She listed them. The names in the cases were Perez, McLaughlin, and I forgot the second out of the third. But these cases were taken in front of states. And she said that 2 out of the 3 were successful, and they preceded Loving versus Virginia. She also rightly pointed out how the second wave of the civil rights movement, or I should say the wave that became successful, was when Emmett Till's mother started it, and MLK and his crew later joined it. What Cynthia G wants to do is she wants to simply say black men don't do enough, and she's going to stick by this forever. And she's going to stick by this because she has seen that white men have, and she still has not refuted my points. So Cynthia G, I'm giving you credit for finding the cases that preceded Loving versus Virginia started by black men. I don't have access right now to confirm or deny them. I'm just conceding the point to you as a courtesy because I'm assuming that you're not stupid enough to make up names of cases. So if you're giving the names for them, I'm assuming that you actually found records. So even if your information was wrong, I'm assuming that you were lied to as opposed to being the liar, and that's if they were wrong. These cases were probably true, as you said, in existence and for the purposes that you have told us. So I'm not going to sit up and say, okay, no, you're wrong about that. I'm going to give you credit for that. But I'm challenging you, Cynthia G, as a man who studied and taught history in the U.S. before I left, I'm challenging you to go back to my video where I responded to you and refute my points. I'm challenging you to do that. Your other points you made in your response to Oshay's response to your initial video about black men expecting everything and wanting nothing, you still, in that video in which you responded to his response to you, you still failed to actually refute some of these points that he and that I made. It is true. Whatever we build is not enough. It is not true that you can just run off to the dominant male to get these things, this infrastructure that you say that you want. It is not true either that Rosewood was razed to the ground because a black man couldn't keep his hands off a white woman. It is not true that Greenville, Oklahoma, next to Tulsa, Black Wall Street, was razed to the ground because a black man kept his hands on a white woman. What wound up happening was that he got on an elevator in Tulsa and bumped into her. He tripped and bumped into her accidentally. And that started everything because they were looking for a reason to burn it down anyway. And it's the same thing with Rosewood. So what you're saying is still actually, your historical facts are still not true. At the end of the day, it does boil down to white violence, and we were the victims, the men and the women. Now, were there some dudes that wanted to get at white women? I'm sure there was some brother somewhere that wanted to get with white women. I'm sure this did exist. I'm sure there were actually a lot of white women that were chasing down black men. I'm quite sure this happened because I've been pursued by white chicks when I was growing up. I was in middle school pursued by white chicks at a time when sisters wouldn't do it. So I know it does exist, and there are going to be some brothers that say, yeah, man, let's go. Let's do that. But back then, you got to understand that would have been more rare than it was when I was growing up back in the 80s and 90s. That would have been quite rare. You would have tried to avoid some stupid stuff like that. Back then, knowing that it would get you killed? No. We know nowadays that these were false accusations that white guys made to get themselves the excuses to do what they wanted to do anyway. We now know this. You're just simply not willing to deal with that. That's where the issue comes in. You're not willing to understand that you can't blame the black man for what another person did to them. You think you can blame black men for what happens to black women, but then that means that you have to blame white men for what happened to black men. But you're not willing to accept that. And at the end of the day, it just comes down to the fact you want to blame the victim. You want to say that it's the man's job to never have anything bad happen to him, and that it's a good man's job to never have anything bad done to him by bad men. Really, you want to sit back and say this. We ain't stupid. We know what the deal is. If there were some brothers that fought the Supreme Court for access to white women, I would say this. The principle was still sound and valid. It still was. If white men had access to black women without marriage, then it is okay for black men to say that we have the right to have legal access to white women through marriage. Really, what they were doing was nice, because the true act of war would have been to go in and raid their communities and rape their women. I mean, war is war, right? I don't even believe in rape. Hate the idea of it. But the point I'm making is that in others' wars, that's exactly what the hell happened. That's exactly what they did. They had access to black women without marriage. And it was seen as being perfectly okay. I mean, how you think a lot of white guys lost their virginity in the South, especially when segregation was legal? So you still are not addressing the fact that at the end of the day, someone did this to us. You want to be able to sit here and say that it's anybody's fault but yours, and the white man's, and that's because what you want is a white guy. And what you're really proving, Cynthia, what you're really proving is that it doesn't matter really to you. The Pookie is not really the alpha. Pookie and Ray Ray aren't really the alpha to you, but they're close. They're the second closest thing. But what, and of course the so-called educated lame to you is automatically not an alpha because he's not even a man. Because he's educated. He does book stuff. That's what you've proven it goes on in your mind. But you've also proven it in your mind. The real alpha is that white man. Whatever he does is okay. Whatever he stops other men from doing is okay. And let me tell you one more thing. Stop saying that black men are the worst off in the world. Because, Cynthia, when I said that black men were not, I was remembering what you said about us being the worst in the world. I'm going to tell you now, you want to sit up and talk about what black men don't provide and what black men don't bring? Well, okay then. Then why don't you take your butt to the Philippines? Because those men can provide some housing. They can't provide medical care, most of them. Very few men can provide medical care to the women. Because the economy is jacked up. Why? Because of white supremacy. But if you go to the Philippines, a lot of these men, they can provide you with some kind of housing, and it's from him. But it's, it's third world. It's second rate. Ain't no running water sometimes. That's what's there, but you can get it. Most of the men can provide only that type of housing, and that's all they can provide and nothing else. That's actually quite normal, and you need to understand that. Most men in the world cannot sit up and provide the type of housing that white men have been able to provide. And they've been able to provide it because they didn't have to do the work. They just took it from somebody else, namely us. That it's always been that way for a long time. That's the truth of the matter. At the end of the day, the global enemy is still white supremacy, and you don't want to accept that fact, but that's exactly what it is. And since you don't want to confront white supremacy, you want to try to goad black men into doing it so they can try to bring back to you what Miss Ann had. You actually have Miss Ann syndrome. O'Shea Duke Jackson was not talking about Miss Ann syndrome just in connection to these other black women. You got it bad. Well, you black men can't provide this, that, and the other. And you're the most incarcerated group in the world. Who did that? Who's the second most incarcerated? That would be you. So you still, and I'm going to admit now, when I found your video by accident, one of my, somebody commented on mine saying that I made no valid points at all, and I thought she had liked O'Shea's video. Then I came back and she said, no, I didn't like his video, I liked hers. When I went back to look at the video she liked, it was in fact your response to his response. So I learned something new. Yeah, these brothers probably did petition the Supreme Court. I don't know why they did it, but they probably did petition the Supreme Court. I could tell you this, though. In order for them to petition the Supreme Court to have access to those women, there had to be two things that were going on. No, there had to be three things that were going on. These women that they wanted to marry were treating them better than any sister would. Sisters were treating them worse than any of these Oshay women would. And there were no third parties of women like Latin Americans or Southeast Asians or Native Americans to pursue. Those are the three things that it would take. One, Becky's treating him well. Sapphire ain't treating him well, don't want him. And third, ain't no third. And the third one is the lack of the third option. Because, see, for me, it's like I done already said. For a lot of brothers nowadays, ain't chasing Becky and Amber. A lot of them nowadays are looking for the Latinas, and you know, the ones that travel, they go for the black Latinas. They ain't going for the Becky. They ain't even going for the mestiza a lot of times. But if they're going for the mestiza or the Native American looking ones, that's still not the white woman. So a lot of brothers actually nowadays, when they don't go for sisters within our race, and regardless of the nationality, when they leave the race, not just the nationality, but the race, they still usually go to a third party. But when women like you jump ship, you go straight for white zaddy. And therein lies the difference. You're pretty much saying it's okay to sell yourself. You're something that is bought and sold. And since white men can afford you more easily than a brother, then he's obviously the better man. No, he can afford you more easily because he robbed somebody. It's always like that. And you're pretty much saying, well, if he robbed, then there's something wrong with you. Why did he rob you? Instead of sitting up and saying, well, why do you have to rob instead of going out and earning the money like other men do? You still won't point the finger at the actual the guilty party. You're still insisting on pointing the finger at the victim, the innocent one, next to whom you got robbed. And this is evidenced by the fact that you admitted you sold your body to white men before. There's a part of you that's still wanting to go back and do that and get that money, even though you had your baby with a brother. Even though you had your baby with a brother that was close to a Pookie or Ray Ray, even though he's not shooting up the block, he fit every other negative stereotype. That's what you've done. You still have not refuted the points. And the other thing too, why the hell does anybody, and I'm asking this of I think it's QRD315, the one who commented on my post. I'm asking you in front of my whole audience, why do you still like Cynthia G's videos when she says this type of stuff, then turns around, flies her own self across the country to get pregnant by Raw Dog Perkins, a serial baby daddy with a bunch of tattoos, and we don't know what job he's got. Can't find none. I mean, she does this. She says that black men are X, Y, and Z, all kind of bad. We every kind of punk bitch motherfucker that you can think of in the English language, as far as she's concerned. Beta male coons and all this other stuff. And she turns around with her so-called conscious self and flies out of her own pocket across the nation to get pregnant by a serial baby daddy. Why is she doing that? But even worse than that, why are you still listening to her? Why do y'all still validate her? The fact that she has the validation from sisters proves that brothers have to step outside in order to have anything to build. Actually, it is true. Brothers can build. And Cynthia G wants to say, no, they're not building. They're nesting. They're nesting in somebody else's stuff. Well, that's where it is. That's what's going on. Look, Cynthia G, let's go ahead and cut the crap. And you and everybody that listens to you, like the one that commented on my video, if the black man is the absolute worst in the world, American or African or Caribbean or Brazilian, if the black man is the absolute worst man in the world to be with, but we're so busy chasing Becky and all these other women, why don't you just drop the black man and go for the men of these women whom we're going for? Why not? If we're into women from the Dominican and Brazil and Philippines and Thailand and Cambodia, but their men are better than us, then why don't you go for their men? You would think it'd be an easy trade, right? Obviously, that's what you would think, but that's not what you're doing. You know that you can't get with them, not because you're black, but because you're a black American. You know that. You know they're going to look at you. As soon as you cop an attitude about something and they've already done their best, they're going to put you in check. You already know this. You also know that some of them will smack the hell out of you. You get out of line, they're going to pop your butt once. You call the cops, it's over. And you ain't going to stay with these because they ain't going to stay with you. You already know this. You already know. Actually, worse than that, a lot of these guys know that that's how it's going to turn out, and they're not willing to give you a chance to begin with because you have a reputation for arguing and being wrong while you do it. You got a reputation for being the most lost in the world. So no, we're not the worst man in the world, but you are the most lost woman in the world, and everybody knows it. We're the only ones that'll give you a shot, but look at what all we have to do and be in order to give you that, in order to get that shot back in return. We can't have a regular job. We got to be unemployed, but somehow still making enough money to get computer equipment to be online with tattoos. That's what it takes to get a shot with a fool like you. So I appreciate you bringing to light those cases, because this does change something, and this is something that I'm going to have to go and tell a lot of brothers in my real personal day-to-day life, physically. Something I'm going to have to tell brothers, man, look, this was a screw-up. And this could have been a reaction to anything, but this was a screw-up. You don't petition your enemy's Supreme Court for access to marry their women. That's not how you fight war. I got to admit that. But by the same token, you still failed to refute the valid points that were raised. You say your points have never been refuted, and literally without exception. No, they've been refuted a lot of times. You refuted your own points when you were buying them plane tickets. That's real. I mean, how many other baby mamas and babies he got? You were his 5th baby mama with his 6th baby, and you knew this. But I'm going to tell people what the real deal is. You didn't fly out there on your own dime, probably, to lay up with him and you know, get pregnant having raw dog sex, even though he was a serial baby mama with 5 kids already. You went out there to do all of this because he was, serial baby daddy. You went out there because he was a serial baby daddy with 5 kids. If he had not had those other women, you wouldn't have been willing to fly yourself out there for that dick. That's exactly what the hell it is. You sit up here telling other regular men what all they got to do and be and build in order to have a shot at you, which it's okay to have, which is fine as long as your standards are consistent. Then you take a dude like him, and all of a sudden you're willing to drop all them standards and come out your own pocket to have that baby. What the hell? And you want to sit up and say that literally without exception your points have never been invalidated. No, you invalidated them from the very beginning. The real truth is I'm not expecting you to listen to reason. But those of you who follow her, like I said, you are still worthless until the day you hit that unsubscribe button and don't pay her any serious attention anymore, unless you're only listening for entertainment purposes. The rest of you need to understand it is that serious. I got to watch what I do, and I have to watch who I follow and who I take from. So do you. If I'm listening to a known fool that is proven or disproven their own points, and I'm taking them seriously, then I'm an idiot. But understand this. What that means, ladies, those of you who follow Cynthia G, is that the same standard applies to you. You don't get an exemption just because you got breast and a vagina. I hope this has been a benefit. Black Heart signing black out. Assalamu alaikum.